see there from my time with the Secret Service, a lot of quality people that have put in a lot of hard work to make sure that this day goes incredibly well and is, again, safe for all those involved.
And right now we are taking a live look, as you can see the convoy right there departing Blair House, as we are expecting a President-elect Trump.
Oh, it is a UGSOUND radio, the #1 internet radio in Uganda.
Matter of moments. Bobby, you were mentioning a lot of familiar faces that you're seeing, in these live streams right here for your time as you were working with the Secret Service. Any final thoughts on the security of truly a historic day?
Yeah, look, the Secret Service wants this to go very well today, as it does every event. The Secret Service, I don't believe, had any action in the rumors that are out there that there were security threats here involved with moving it inside. I don't believe any of that. The Secret Service wants to show America that our democracy is working, that our transfer of power will happen at noontime today. The detail agents that are with President Trump today will move over, the detail agents that are with President Biden today will move over to President Trump at 12 noon. The presidential detail does not change despite the individual in that office. So there's a seamless transfer of power as well as a seamless transfer of protection that will be seen today by the Secret Service and the new administration.
Bobby, we do appreciate you taking the time to really overview the security measures in place, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Always a pleasure, Stephanie. Thank you.
All right, and we do want to continue our coverage. I want to bring back in my colleague Andrew Kraft, as we are expecting a President-elect Trump to arrive at St. John's Church right here, and we see that the door is opening and taking a look. And yes, Andrew, that is President-elect Donald Trump right here arriving at St. John's Church. We can see the fist pump, just another symbol for those who are watching. What do you make of this moment right here?
Well, I think it's so striking, Stephanie, that St. John's Episcopal Church, it's right across the street from the White House. It's near Lafayette Square, and I think a lot of people might remember in that summer of 2020, June of 2020, during some of those really dangerous riots that were happening in D.C. at the time. You remember Trump walked from the White House to St. John's. He stood outside the church and he lifted a Bible. Sign of show of strength in the moment of a pretty perilous time in the country, in the nation's capital. You see there the First Lady's father. You also see Jared Kushner was just there. So we're going to see a lot of the Trump family members today, obviously, and you just saw, for those kind of following the fashion trends, Usha Vance and Melania Trump and what they're wearing. That's always kind of a key kind of focal point of the day as well, Stephanie.
Yes, and you were mentioning, you were naming those that you saw, and I also wanted to share this with our viewers right here, as Representative Mike Waltz shared this social media post saying, St. John's Church, the Church of the Presidents, God bless America. And you can also see Elon Musk also in attendance for this service right here. And we were talking about, the tech giants that are going to be at the swearing in ceremony as well. Elon Musk, of course, is set to attend that. But we are seeing a number of notables walking into St. John's Church right here. What we're going to do is, it's a little unclear, Andrew, whether we're going to actually be able to get a live stream inside the service itself. But this is another exterior angle of St. John's Church right there, as President-elect Trump has arrived alongside soon-to-be First Lady Melania Trump. And as you mentioned, a number of family members and other notables. What we're going to do is we're going to step away for just a brief 2-minute break, continuing our live coverage after that. Stay with us.
Owuliriza UGSOUND Radio, the #1 internet radio mu Uganda. Owuliriza UGSOUND Radio, the #1 internet radio mu Uganda.
Welcome back to Live Now from Fox on this Inauguration Day 2025. I'm Stephanie Quinu. This is a live look right here of the nation's capital, a beautiful look on this Monday, Inauguration Day 2025. And in fact, you can see the American flags draped there along the U.S. Capitol. What is different, perhaps you can take a look, it is empty. And typically on Inauguration Day, we have hundreds of thousands of folks who are there lining the mall ahead of the swearing-in ceremony, excited to be part of history and to participate in this historic event. That has now changed because of the frigid temperatures, the actual temperatures in the 20s, the feel-like temperatures much colder than that, with the winds continuing to pick up. And because of that, the decision was made last Friday to transition the swearing-in ceremony from outdoors to indoors inside the Capitol Rotunda. The second time this has happened, the last time being back in 1985 for former President Ronald Reagan. To talk more on this historic day, I do want to bring back in my colleague Andrew Kraft as we continue. Take a live look right here outside of St. John's Church, where we saw President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance walk inside, likely not going to be allowed cameras inside as this service gets underway. But you were noting who was actually arriving and going through those doors, Andrew, and it's really the who's who of not only Washington, but really of U.S. business industries.
Of Elon Musk, he's inside there, also members of the Trump family. And this is going to be a different Washington for the next 4 years. A unified government. Republicans will control, obviously, the House and the Senate. Donald Trump is in the White House. And so we'll see what will be on the agenda and whether or not the agenda can get done. You are seeing kind of some of these Republicans who usually are hawkish on China, somewhat fall in line on President-elect Trump's stance on TikTok. I've only seen a few Republican senators somewhat break with the president-elect on what to do with TikTok. So I thought that was interesting. But to your point, we have this really beautiful live picture there of St. John's Episcopal Church. If you're familiar with Washington, it's right across the street from the White House, right across the street from Lafayette Square. And to your point, Stephanie, on Inauguration days, in memoriam, it has been used for the incoming president-elect to, if they are imbued with their personal faith, to reflect, to, ask for God's divine grace and thanks and forgiveness as they embark on this incredibly, extremely weighty job, the weight of the world falling on the shoulders of those who sit in. That's what we're seeing right now happen there. And so I thought it was interesting. Obviously, President Biden is an adherent of the Catholic faith. He's a devout Catholic. So he did not do this tradition back in 2021. He chose instead to participate in a service there at the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle, a really, really beautiful church. For those of our Catholic viewers in Washington, Biden chose that church before getting sworn in back in January of 2021. So, yes, if you are the incoming president-elect, you can choose based on your faith, but this has been a tradition going back many, many decades, I believe even to some of our founding fathers, and it is quintessential Washington. It is imbued with history, and you're seeing right now the motorcade posted up outside St. John's there as this service is underway. So you're right, we're not going to get any live pictures inside, but we will see the departure from St. John's, where I believe the president-elect and the first lady and the vice president-elect and the second lady will go from that church, I believe, to the White House to meet with the Bidens.
And I also wanted, Andrew, to bring up for our viewers right here some additional information about the St. John's Church. And you mentioned President Biden being of Catholic faith. St. John's is Episcopalian. And just for our viewers right there, just wanted to share some historical information right there. As you mentioned, it is known as the Church of Presidents, as it has welcomed every president to worship, beginning with James Madison. So, you know, talking about the traditions and the history behind every event that we are going to be seeing today, many of them being started by some of those many, many years ago. Not every president has followed every single one of these traditions, some of them making their own tradition. And, you know, as I was, taking a look at some of the history, seeing one of those trivias, which was, JFK being the last president to be sworn in to wear a top hat. So, history being made every single time, there is a swearing in ceremony. And I have to imagine, Andrew, that there is going to be history made. President-elect Trump, not one necessarily to stand on tradition. As he was mentioning, as he was campaigning, he is looking to forge a new path to disrupt the status quo, already doing that even before being officially sworn in and looking ahead to the next 4 years. I have to imagine we are likely going to be seeing a lot of firsts.
Yeah, I think that will be somewhat evident in the slate of executive orders that will be kind of signed by Trump's pen and his hand today. Fox News Digital is reporting that there are scores of them ready to go. And that is what kind of the presidential transition is for, Stephanie. You have a lot of these people who are going to be working with you for the next 4 years. They're incoming White House staff, incoming agency staff, and they have relied on some kind of outside think tanks and nonprofits, conservative ones at that, to help them draft these. So these have been ready to go really for a while. It's not like they're being drafted last minute. And it really runs the gamut on the environment, on the southern border, and so much more, on the kind of civil and federal bureaucracy about what powers the executive has to fire government employees at will here. And so we're going to see that after the inauguration, after the swearing in. They are ready to go, according to some of our reporting. And that's what a transition is for. But to your point, Donald Trump in 2017, after winning the 2016 election, he vowed to change up the status quo. His very election was the definition of that. And you can argue, and historians will, on whether he did that in his first term. And so now we're going to see a second Trump term, and you're going to see him partake and pursue some of the policy routes that he didn't necessarily get to in the first term. That is what a second term is for. Obviously, there was an interregnum of 4 years as President Biden and Vice President Harris won that election back in 2020. And so, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see on what is going to be priority number one. But he's going to have a lot of latitude. He's going to have a lot of leeway because he has the House and the Senate to really reshape how things are done here. He created the Department of Government Efficiency already. There's been some reporting out there that Vivek Ramaswamy is out already at that. And so that was another, remember, feature of the first Trump presidency. A lot of staff shakeups. They really had to get their, steady bearing under them. There was a lot of cabinet resignations. There was a lot of firings. There's just a lot of turnover. And I'm not necessarily sure if you're going to see that this time.
It's so true, Andrew, and it's going to be very interesting, I have to say, as you were mentioning the difference between 2017 and now. Of course, so much has happened in the world. It's a different time right now. We have been seeing a lot of wars, a lot of conflicts, a lot of different issues arise that perhaps weren't even in existence back 4 years ago. A tremendous amount of change has occurred as we take another live look at the nation's capital, where we see the American flag there waving in the distance. And of course, wind chill, Andrew, continuing to be a conversation maker, as so much of what we were expecting today, we were preparing for, has changed because of the weather, the incredibly cold weather in the 20s. And of course, it feels much colder. And so, there is not that much pomp and circumstance. We're not going to be seeing the outdoor parade. We are going to be seeing it inside the Capital One Arena. But again, just very different from what I think a lot of people were preparing for. And it's not just physical preparement, right? We have the nation. We have President-elect Trump winning the popular vote, the electoral vote. So many people anticipating and waiting for this moment. They've been waiting for years. And unfortunately, many of the people who have made this journey to Washington, D.C., not going to be able to witness it firsthand because it's inside. And I have to imagine a lot of disappointed people today, as well as, of course, celebration, just different for them.
Yeah, I myself have never been or never attended an inauguration. But I would imagine it's just, you really feel the sense of history. And the pomp and circumstance when you do travel to Washington, and you get to kind of bask in, how we do this, how we have done this uninterrupted for almost the last 250 years. And just have to note, obviously, the last inauguration, President Trump did not attend that inauguration. At the time, Vice President Pence, he attended Biden and Harris's swearing in here. So he is back. And so that uninterrupted transition, peaceful transition of power, you've heard it a lot from President Biden in the last couple of days. You heard it a lot from Vice President Harris and incoming President-elect Trump. That is what they are committed to. But I want to go back to this, which I think is interesting. We've been talking about faith and how important faith is to our elected leaders, including and especially the President of the United States. You and I just anchored, of course, special coverage of the 39th President, Jimmy Carter's funeral, as the nation said goodbye to him earlier this month. And faith was a really big part of his life and of his presidency as well. And obviously the question is, what Bible will President-elect Trump use to be sworn in on? He will use two Bibles. He will use his mother's Bible and Lincoln's Bible, of course, that was used by Abraham Lincoln in 1861. It's been used for, I believe, every modern swearing in the modern presidency. So it is deeply, deeply symbolic of just a prop, an object for the country to see that. But we will see that inside. And I only bring up faith because as we speak right now, inside St. John's Episcopal Church, the Trumps and the Vances are inside. And this is a tradition. This is a custom that has been really since the founding fathers' days, since that church went up there right across the street from the White House. So they're keeping with that tradition. And obviously, J.D. Vance himself, a convert to Catholicism. Donald Trump has talked about his faith in interviews in the past and how it guides him. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge that and note that because that is a key feature of these presidencies.
And as we're taking a look at St. John's Church as well as Capitol Hill, you mentioned that, and we were hearing so much of faith. President Biden, of course, is speaking a lot, and he has been known to speak a lot about his Catholic faith. And we do, see, even though church and state, of course, are separate, we do also see perhaps the connection as well as many presidents make faith a tent pole for them as they navigate the ups and the downs of the political world right there. Andrew, I also wanted to share this because, my producer just wanted to share this with us that New York City Mayor Eric Adams is in line for a potential pardon, and he will be attending President-elect Trump's inauguration. We do know that they met last week as well. And, Mayor Adams, a Democrat, attending. So we also see, the Democrats and the Republicans perhaps, looking ahead to the future, looking to forge a new path. And, everyone who attends the swearing in ceremony is there for a reason. And so this is also interesting to note as we continue to learn a little bit more about who's going to be at the inauguration. Of course, the inauguration now inside the Capitol Rotunda. So only just 600 people allowed inside. And it does appear, at least according to Politico, that New York City Mayor Eric Adams will be one of those attendees.
Yeah, that is so interesting. That trip to Florida that Mayor Adams made last week, and Mayor Adams' chief spokesperson came out and he said definitively no pardon was discussed. Adams's indictment was not discussed with the incoming president-elect. They talked about a number of things, including the issue of crime, including the issue of illegal immigration, including the Israel-Hamas war as well. But interesting to note, yes, one of the nation's biggest cities mayors will be in attendance. You're talking about that 600 number, and I've been seeing photos from the 85 inauguration with President Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan at the time, and there was a kind of bird's eye panoramic view of the rotunda. And I don't know if we can pull that up, but definitely looked like a lot more than 600 people. So it's going to be jam-packed, to your point, though, Stephanie. And it'll be something we haven't seen in 40 years. And so that is kind of what I'll be looking forward to, how they came about this so quickly, how they pulled this together. A lot of work, a lot of effort going into that. And we'll just have to wait and see.
It is going to be interesting. Our senior producer, Julianne, is going to try and work to pull up the video for the Capitol Rotunda to just show just how large it is. But no doubt they are going to be at capacity inside as, of course, everyone, wants to be part of this historic moment right there. Another live look at the U.S. Capitol. And you can see on the left-hand side of your screen the tree without leaves shaking in the wind. And once again, just a visible reminder as to why all of this has now evolved, has morphed into an indoor events day. It's because of the bitter cold. And, of course, most of these swearing-in ceremonies held outdoors for the public to attend. And so many folks have had those tickets in hand, ready to wait in line. And that has been drastically changed right here. But my producer just sharing this with us. This, of course, is from the Republican Party. It says the location may have changed, but crews are already hard at work to ensure a successful inauguration and a peaceful transfer of power. So this is a look right there at walking up the steps, walking into the Capitol Rotunda right there. And to your point, Andrew, it gives us a better idea about, the capacity of this, and I don't know if you know this, Andrew, but, no doubt people are going to be able to be seated, but I also have to imagine it might be standing room only, as so many people do want to make sure that they attend today's historic swearing-in ceremony.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, who is seated or standing where. Obviously, that's a much easier to do on the dais outside in the front of the U.S. Capitol because you can see it very, very clearly. But we're going to see a jam-packed Capitol Rotunda, and it'll be interesting to see who is seated next to who or standing next to who and who gets that prime placement in front of the cameras here. Of course, a big kind of storyline in all of this, Stephanie, is, you know, who's not attending today. You and I have discussed that. We discussed that on Friday. The AP reported last week former First Lady Michelle Obama will not be there. We also know it was reported that former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi won't be there, and some of these other prominent Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She came out on Instagram Live just over the weekend saying that she would not be there as well. So I think it's interesting, to your point, to just say who will and who won't be there. I'm always looking for that.
It is going to be interesting, the who's who, so to speak. And Andrew, we are going to step away for a 2-minute break, but after that, we do want to bring in presidential historian Jim Robinault to talk more about the historic events that we are going to be seeing and couching it when it comes to looking ahead, but also looking behind, because, you know, the present and the future are always influenced by the past. We're going to have that interesting conversation coming up after the break, Andrew. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our Live Now from Fox Inauguration Day 2025 coverage as we look ahead to the official swearing-in ceremony of President-elect Donald J. Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. I'm Stephanie Quinu, and you're taking a live look right here at a very chilly Capitol building right there with the American flags, and you can actually see the stage had been set for the upcoming swearing-in ceremony. Unfortunately, you can also see not a person right there on the mall. Typically, crowds would have already walked in preparing in anticipation for this historic moment because of the weather, because of the dangerously cold temperatures and the wind chill. The swearing-in ceremony is now going to be held inside the Capitol Rotunda. Just the second time, the last time being back in 1985 for former President Ronald Reagan's second swearing-in ceremony. And a lot of disappointed people, as you can imagine, making the journey to Washington, D.C. to witness this historic moment as President-elect Trump to be sworn in as the 47th president. He was sworn in first 8 years ago as the 45th president. So just the second president to be elected non-consecutively. Grover Cleveland, in fact, being the very first president to have that happen. And to give more on this historical perspective, we do want to bring in Jim Robinault, who is a presidential historian and a friend of Live Now from Fox. And Jim, we appreciate you taking the time to join us on this Inauguration Day.
Hi, Andrew. Good to see you.
And we are taking a live look, Jim, at St. John's Church, where President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance are inside, along with a number of notables. Andrew and I have been discussing this all morning long in terms of who will be attending. And it is very significant in terms of who is being allowed inside the Capitol Rotunda to witness this historic moment, because these are a select few handpicked by President-elect Trump. What do you make of those who we know will be in attendance, Jim?
Well, I think that, it's a very small space, actually. And I told Andrew last week that if you go back and watch the inaugural of Reagan in 1985, everybody is standing. It looks like that's what's going to be the case here, so they can get more people in there. If they had chairs, it'd be even less. I think they estimated about 1,000 people made it into Reagan's inaugural inside the Capitol. If they had chairs, it'd probably be only about 600 people. So it's a very confined space. As I understand it, they're using the hall, the Great Hall that's just been built in front of the Capitol, the entrance to the Capitol, for overflow for 1,800 guests who will be there. It's a beautiful space, but it's not like being there in person. So it's going to be a very intimate affair. And I think in Reagan's case in 1985, it did provide a nice backdrop for him inside the Capitol, and with all these people standing around and standing next to each other as he gave his speech.
I just wanted to bring up, we do have some reporting in, if we could take the shot outside St. John's Church. Bloomberg's reporting some of those who are in attendance with the president-elect and the vice president-elect. I'm learning, and they're learning, Mark Zuckerberg is there, Jeff Bezos is there, Tim Cook is there, the TikTok CEO, Xiao Chu, is there. Also, Argentinian leader Javier Milei is there, and the former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, among those in attendance for the service there. Jim, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. I know it's early, but I got to ask, because I don't want to belabor this point here today because it's about Donald Trump's inauguration, but we have to ask you what President Biden just issued about 2 hours ago: preemptive pardons for a slew of Trump critics. Now, in just about an hour's time, Biden and Trump will be in the same car together. They'll be exchanging pleasantries. And he just delivered this parting shot to his longtime political rival. And we can get into what a preemptive pardon is, if any presidents have ever done that. What do you make of that? That this one last final barb to a political foe he delivered with hours left as president?
Well, it's interesting, Andrew. I mean, the pardon power is a really important part of our history. If you go back to the beginning of the country, there was a rebellion in the country by people who had served in the Continental Army, who were not getting their pay and whose homes were being, taken from them. It was called Shays' Rebellion. That rebellion led to the need for a constitutional convention in our Constitution. It brought George Washington out of retirement and back into political life. So that rebellion was much about trying to quell people who had been violent, who had stormed courthouses to stop court proceedings and so forth. And that's why the pardon power was put into our Constitution, was to allow a president to calm take the temperature down, to end something that could be, a very dangerous rebellion against the nation itself, and pardon people like Colonel Shays or Captain Shays. That power also was shown at the end of the Civil War with the general amnesty that was issued to the Confederate soldiers. And there was actually an act of Congress under the 14th Amendment for that. Then you get to, the First World War, and Warren Harding very courageously gave a pardon to Eugene Debs, who was a socialist leader who ran for president 4 times. He ran against Harding in the election of 1920. And Harding commuted his sentence. He had been put in jail for speaking out against the war. And many considered him a traitor for doing that. But a lot of people felt that was just First Amendment right to protest against the war. And when Harding did that, his entire cabinet was not in favor of it. His wife was not in favor of it. But the point was to try to settle things and heal wounds. So we saw it with Nixon. We saw it with Carter with the Vietnam vets. It's a power that is used at moments like this, and it's to be compared to what Donald Trump has said he's going to do with the January 6 people when he gets into office. Right. So it's a very important power, actually, and it's important to try to put some disputes in the past and not keep fighting about things that just will go on and on. Long history, long answer to that, but that's the history of the pardon power, and it's absolute under the Constitution.
And Jim, I just wanted to let our viewers see this live look right here as we do see President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcome in Vice President Harris and a second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, right there as they are also preparing to participate in this swearing-in ceremony. Of course, having that farewell ceremony as well. We see them standing at attention. And I also want to bring in this, Jim, because there's the political dynamic that we're going to see at play today right here as well. And even in the same party, you take a look at this and you see President Biden really being forced out by his own party, and then Vice President Harris tapped to take on President-elect Trump. And we see this. We're also going to see this at play during the swearing-in ceremony, as we also talk about who will be there and, of course, who will not be there. And we do know that Michelle Obama will not be in attendance. She wasn't at the funeral service for former President Jimmy Carter, also not attending the swearing-in ceremony. And that's getting a lot of chatter. What can you make of that, Jim? What can you share with us in terms of that perspective?
Well, again, if you look at our history, we've had, I think, 4 different presidents who have not attended their successors' inauguration, all the way back to 1801 when John Adams, the second president, refused to attend the ceremony for Thomas Jefferson in 1801. A very bitter campaign. And Adams got up at 4 in the morning and left the Capitol rather than attend. His son, John Quincy Adams, did not attend when Jackson came in, too. Another cantankerous time. What I would point out is I think we ought to look back. Reagan's inaugural, his very first inaugural, when he defeated Jimmy Carter. Again, bitter campaign. Carter was bitterly disappointed. Reagan got up and he started his inaugural by saying that, the orderly transfer of authority as called by the Constitution routinely takes place, as it has for almost 2 centuries. And few of us stop to think about how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. In the very next statement, he spoke to Carter, calling him Mr. President. I want the nation to know how you've helped me in this transition of power. That is something that we should not take for granted. It's good that President Biden and that Vice President Harris are going to be attending. It's very important that they do that. For his own reasons, Donald Trump did not attend 4 years ago, but we need to reestablish that and keep that as the peaceful transfer of power in our government, or we don't have much of a government. But it's good to look back at somebody like Reagan, who was very gracious about it, very gracious with Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter before him had been very gracious with Gerald Ford after Watergate, who had pardoned Richard Nixon, by the way, and one of the reasons he didn't win. So as I see it, it's important that the president and vice president attend. Other people like Michelle Obama can make their own decisions. I would prefer that she would come rather than have the distraction, but it's definitely her decision about what to do. As I understand it, President Obama is going to be attending. So this is an important point and an important moment in our constitutional government. And really, we see a lot of grace by many people who have gone through this. And we also see others who have decided not to attend. So it goes both
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, it's no stranger to anyone that it's hard to lose. It's hard to lose on such a public stage as a U.S. presidential election. I want to talk, though, with you about the inaugural address, and we can maybe get into what your favorite inaugural address is as a presidential historian. Mine is Lincoln's second inaugural here. But what will Trump say today? Will he, like Reagan, give a nod, give some words in his speech to both Biden and Harris in some show of grace? I'll be looking for that because obviously that portion in his first inaugural back in 2017, the American Carnage section, a lot of people infamously remember that. But he's saying his speech is going to be one of unity today.
And I also wanted to share with our viewers, Andrew, Jim, before you answer that, it does appear that President-elect Trump is departing now. St. John's Church, we saw him alongside Melania Trump exiting the church. It does seem as though the service has wrapped up. They're walking hand in hand right there, and he's smiling to the crowd. Thank you, he says, mouthing those words and walking into the escort right there, the convoy. You know, and I just wanted to share that with our viewers as we continue to take a live look. But you know, Andrew was sharing some of his favorite, inaugural speeches. You know, do you have one?
Yes. I mean, if you look at inaugurals, Andrew, as you've said, the message of unity is what's most important. And you see it again and again. A lot of these inaugurals are a genre that, follows kind of a pattern. The president starting off humbly thanking the voters, essentially saying, I'm not sure I'm up to the task, as George Washington famously said in his very first inaugural, and then going through and saying, as Thomas Jefferson did in 1801, this dispute with Adams, he said, then we are all Federalists, we are all Republicans, meaning we're all Americans. And after hard campaigns, a president needs to unify the country because the president's going to be governing the entire country. And so that's a very important message. I've seen that Trump is intending to talk about unity. Actually, if you look back at his speech, the American Carnage speech from 4 years ago, he actually did talk about unity there too. And so it is a really important message. But if you ask me, what are the important inaugurals? Obviously, Washington's, Jefferson's, and then I agree with Andrew, both of Lincoln's, but especially Lincoln's second inaugural, which was very important. Again, the country then torn apart by war, and 600,000 Americans losing their lives, huge change in the country politically. And Lincoln chose that occasion to say, with malice towards none, with charity for all, let us bind up our wounds. That's the kind of message that you need to have after you've had a rough and tumble time, and especially when you've had, such a severe war. The other two that I really like are Franklin Roosevelt's 1933, The Only Thing We Have to Fear is Fear Itself, where he tried to calm the nation in the midst of this Great Depression. And it was a really important message that calmed the fears in the country that, banks closing and things like that. It was a really difficult time. His message was one of fortitude and, bucking up the American people. And then my absolute favorite actually is JFK's 1961 inaugural, when he talked about, you let the torch be passed to us, and then we need to be a country of service. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It's a wonderful, beautiful speech, very well put together, beautifully delivered on a day not unlike today. It was about 22 degrees. You can see the breath. And Kennedy got up, no hat, no overcoat, and gave this very stirring speech that is worth watching, and I think considered one of the top 2 or 3 inaugurals.
Jim, I also wanted to ask too, because we are in 30 days of mourning as a country in the wake of the death of former President Carter. President Biden issuing the guidance and the order for all American flags on federal buildings to be lowered to half staff. But in the last couple of days, you've heard from Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. You've heard from some Republicans on some state houses that is going to happen. But we're learning, according to some reports, that Speaker Johnson also had ordered that for the U.S. Capitol, but some staff, the crew, are trying to bring it back to full staff, but the cords are frozen because it is so cold. I wanted to ask, though, was there a previous time when the nation was under a 30-day period of mourning for a former president or whatever during the time of an inauguration? Can you think of one? Is that unique?
I think it is unique. If you look at the 47th POTUS, but we've had 78 different ceremonies because every consecutive POTUS, numbered POTUS, if you have two, swearing in ceremonies. And then we have this quirk of several presidents who died in office. And those presidents, there was an immediate transfer of power to the vice presidents in those situations. And in, Nixon's resignation, the transfer to Gerald Ford. So when those presidents died in office, and you would have had, the flags at half-mast, other than the giving of the oath to the vice presidents under these, dire circumstances. It was done in various places, by the way. It wasn't just in the Capitol. Calvin Coolidge, when he took over after Harding died, his father swore him in Vermont. And several times when that sort of thing happened, an emergency presidency, if you will, those would be followed by some public ceremony on the East Portico. So to answer your question, I don't think this has ever happened before where we've had the death of a former president or a president that resulted in flags being flown at half staff during an inauguration. It would have been during a time of, emergency. LBJ down in Dallas, he was sworn in on Air Force One. Very interesting trivia question there. The person who swore LBJ in was Sarah Hughes, who was a federal district court judge who had been appointed by Kennedy and was, a friend of LBJ's. He waited for her to come out. The only woman to ever administer the oath of office.
Wow.
And so you see that famous scene, which really interesting to me because I wrote in my book, January 1973, that she's the one who administered that oath. She was later the judge who decided Roe v. Wade in the lower court.
Wow.
And Wade was the guy who was the prosecutor who brought Oswald out, Henry Wade. So kind of a strange quirk. And then Roe v. Wade is issued on January 22, 1973. Later that day, Roe v. Wade is decided in the Supreme Court. And later that day, Lyndon Johnson dies. So there's a lot of real interesting connections to that story. But, I think when you look at where the country is in terms of mourning a president or a former president, I don't think that's ever happened before. And I think that, to me, this issue is one that is not worth much fighting about. It is what it is. Yeah. And, it's symbolic to some people, so be it. But I think it is the law that you have to keep them at half staff.
And now we're taking a live look as President-elect Trump is arriving at Blair House. This is really just the stepstone, if you will, before he arrives at the Capitol Rotunda. And Jim, you were sharing with us in terms of previous inaugural speeches and previous significant events. As a historian, of course, typically you take a look at the past, but you're also viewing what is happening in real time through that historical lens. And I'm curious for you, when you're taking a look at the historic events unfolding before our very eyes, before the nation, before the world, what are you most focusing on today?
Yeah, Stephanie, it's a good question. I think that given what President Biden did this morning, this day will be remembered for pardons. Both the pardons that Biden issued and the pardons that President Trump has said he's going to issue. And we're still not sure whether it's going to be a blanket pardon for everyone who was convicted of January 6th crimes or if it's going to be select. But, this day is going to be remembered for that. And I think people will put a lot of context around it because it will be on the Democrat side, they will say, you know, we needed to do this because people were being threatened with political prosecutions. And on the Republican side, they're going to say, well, you politically prosecuted President Trump and these people who were protesting in 2020. Really shows a real divide in our country through this mechanism of the pardon power. And it's definitely going to be the thing that we're going to remember. You know, it's interesting that, you know, the people who write these speeches for presidents spend a lot of time looking at the past inaugurals. And it is interesting to go back and look at them. They're real points in time. But if you look at some of the people who wrote their inaugurals before they had speechwriters per se, James Garfield in 1881, who was a college president, just a genius in math, Civil War general, and he won in 1881. He would then be assassinated 6 months later, but he could not, he had writer's block. He could not write it out, and he had nightmares about it. And finally, he had a dream that kind of provoked him into writing what he was going to write. But it's a really important historical document that sets the nation in a point in time, but it also looks back. Most of these inaugurals reference George Washington in some way or another. Most of them reference the founding fathers. Most of them, like President Reagan, reference the miracle of the transfer of power, the peaceful transfer of power in this country. And then, of course, they talk about where they are and what they want to do. They don't necessarily talk about, you know, down nitty gritty policy. It's more principles of where they want to take the nation and what they want to do. And, you know, that was true of Trump's first inaugural. That was true of Biden's inaugural. This whole idea of talking about broad principles and ways that you want to lead the nation. So it's an important time, an important document, an important marker for our country, and it's worthwhile going back and reading a number of these inaugural addresses to really get a feel for how the country got through very difficult times, how the country got through very good times, and how we progressed and moved forward as a nation.
And moving forward, we were just sharing with our viewers, Jim, you know, more individuals leaving, departing St. John's Church. We were seeing Barron Trump, you know, obviously the youngest son of President-elect Trump, along with a number of his other family members. And right here, we do see Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff welcoming Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. And so it does appear as though perhaps they're having a conversation. So I did want to raise the audio for our viewers to see what we can hear.
Great.
The audio just a little bit difficult to hear, but from what we saw with the exchange, you know, Jim, what do you make of this? Obviously, it was an incredibly contentious election cycle, and neither individual really mincing words, or anyone for that matter. When we take a look at this exchange, again, history in the making, you know, what do you glean from that?
It's interesting to me. We've had very few senators become presidents. John Kennedy was one of them. Barack Obama was one, and Warren Harding was one. Very few people come out of the Senate and become president. A lot of them come from the House. A lot of them are governors like Reagan and Carter. But these two people, J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris, both come out of the Senate tradition, which is a very collegial fight, but then get along type of atmosphere. And you could kind of see it in the way they greeted each other. There was grace there on both sides. And I think that that's an important message for the American people, that we can disagree vehemently about policies and about all sorts of things that are really important to us. But at the end of the day, just like those senators have to get along in their legislating for the American people, those two showed that they have Senate blood in them, so to speak, that they both are willing to be collegial and to speak to each other as human beings and as fellow politicians. So I was pleased to see that. I was pleased to see the smiles, and I think it's an important message for the American people.
And I also wanted to share, Jim.
Andrew Kraft here. So, talking about their Senate careers, they weren't in the Senate for very long, Harris nor Vance at all. So they didn't necessarily get to, show maybe their legislative bona fides. They were really instantly catapulted to the White House, so to speak, weren't they?
Yes, it's a good point, Andrew. I'm not sure they overlap with each other. I don't think they did. I think she was vice
They
president.
didn't, no.
Yeah, when he was elected. I'm from Ohio, so I know J.D. Vance. I don't know him personally, but I know about him. And, I know that when he was in the Senate, he didn't have enough time to really establish himself, as you've said. She kind of established herself when she was doing essentially cross-examination of Supreme Court justice candidates and also on a banking committee. So she was known for being she's a former prosecutor, and she was known for that, in her time in the Senate. She had a little more time there than he did. But if you look at J.D. Vance, it's an interesting thing. Ohio, along with Virginia, claims the most presidents. And the Virginia presidents all came early on: George Washington, Monroe, Madison, Jefferson, and so forth. And then we had the Civil War. And from the Civil War until Warren Harding in 1920, Ohio ruled the presidency. It was Grant, Hayes, Garfield, McKinley, Taft, just a slew of Ohioans. And Ohio became known as the mother of presidents, because many of those people were born in Ohio, but not necessarily, like Grant ran from Illinois. But Ohio was known as a swing state. It was known as a part of the country type state where, people from both sides would share power back and forth. It's become very red at this point. It's become very ruby red at this point. The Ohio legislature is supermajority Republican. And we now have two Republican senators, because Sherrod Brown just lost his re-election campaign. So he came out of that milieu, which is a little bit different from the former Ohio presidents, who came out of a milieu where there was more of a give and take in Ohio, and a division, pretty equal division in the state. It's why it was a bellwether state for over 100 years. But all of those Ohio presidents were Republicans. They were in the tradition of Lincoln. They were in the tradition of reconstructing the South and so forth. A lot of interesting stories about them. And so J.D. Vance falls into that. I think we've had one vice president who is from Ohio, but it'll be interesting to see what he gets to do, how he's included in the decisions that are made in the next 4 years. Jimmy Carter started the tradition with Mondale of bringing him into the Oval Office and giving him an office in the White House, and consulting with him regularly. And that's been more or less true, but I think it'll be interesting to see. Donald Trump is such a dominant leader, and J.D. Vance has so little experience, relatively speaking. It'll be interesting to see how much he's included and what task he's given, by the president, or if he'll be less of an authority than in the past. So very interesting questions to come.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, Jim, because, talking about the role of the vice president during former President Jimmy Carter's funeral, we were hearing the words of the late former Vice President Mondale, and talking about the reason why he accepted was because he wanted the role of the vice president to be one that was respected, one that was more equal than in years past. And it is going to be interesting to see what that dynamic is like, and what role JD Vance will play. As we continue to take a look outside of Blair House, we are expecting President-elect Trump to depart momentarily. And on the lower right-hand side of your screen, that is an aerial view from inside the Capitol Rotunda. Just a stunning view as we take a look. And previously, there were some singers. It does look like perhaps the ceremony, that portion of it has concluded, as we do see people exit right there. But just sharing with our viewers the different vantage points as we continue to watch in real time the events unfold. But it is absolutely interesting to see the very beginning, almost, Jim and Andrew, of what is to come in the next 4 years, you know, setting the stage for what is likely to be a very different presidency. And you were mentioning the dynamic and the role, you know, couching that in historical context with previous dynamics and relationships between former presidents and their vice presidents. You know, Andrew, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what unfolds.
Yeah, that's so true. I just have to know, we do see Marine One there in front of the Capitol. That's always a very, very cool shot there. Maybe we could take that full. You see the presidential helicopter there in front of the U.S. Capitol. And so we'll see who gets on that. I believe it will take the Bidens away, and then it will also take the Trumps to the White House. But my producers can correct me if I'm wrong on that front. Can we take the shot of Blair House? While we have Jim, can we just talk about the significance of Blair House? From my understanding, it's kind of like the country's guest room, so to speak. What do we know about it?
Yeah. What we know is that during the Second World War, when Winston Churchill came to the United States and stayed for weeks on end in the White House with Franklin Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt was not very happy about that. And eventually she said to him, why don't we have Blair House, which had been there, become kind of our guest house for dignitaries who come, rather than having them stay in the White House. There are these hilarious stories of Winston Churchill walking around you know, the White House in the middle of the night. And there's one very famous story of him standing up naked in a bathtub that he was in, saying the Prime Minister of England has nothing to hide from the President of the United States. You know, it was just, it was a real annoyance to Eleanor Roosevelt. So Blair House became kind of this very famous place for distinguished guests to stay. But during Truman's time, the White House was literally falling apart. And so they went in, you ought to see some of the pictures of this. They gutted the White House during Truman's administration. And he lived across the street in Blair House during that time. So it became kind of the White House itself. You know, then they recreated the White House to what it is now. But it was literally, they were worried that it was going to collapse because it had been so weakened over time. And during that time when Truman was in the Blair House, there was a Puerto Rican nationalist uprising at the time. And there were several of the Puerto Rican nationalists who got guns, came to Blair House to try to assassinate Truman. They got as far as the guards in front of Blair House. Truman was actually taking a nap inside. Several of the guards were killed. The nationalists were killed. It was a really traumatic incident at that time. But the Blair House goes way back. I mean, the people who stayed there and came over to see Lincoln when he was in the White House is interesting. But it really became what you talked about, Andrew, a kind of let's have our visitors stay in the Blair House as opposed to having them stay in the White House.
And as we talk about the Blair House, we are still waiting for President-elect Donald Trump to depart. But this is a live look there at the Capitol, where we were seeing his daughter, Ivanka Trump, arrive along with a number of other family members right there. This is a live look as they already are starting to trickle in inside the Capitol. You see Eric Trump right there as well, walking inside, of course, awaiting for President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect JD Vance to arrive. But another, historical moment in the making, Jim and Andrew, as this is really just the second time that the swearing-in ceremony is taking place inside at the Capitol Rotunda. because of the weather, the incredibly cold weather. But what's also interesting to note is that there have been very cold swearing in ceremonies that have taken place outdoor. And Jim, historically, when we're taking a look at the decision making process when it comes to whether or not to hold an inauguration, traditionally outside or now shifting inside, what is the thought process historically when it comes to determining, the events and where they take place?
Good question. Very good question. It gives us a chance to talk about this building too a little bit. When the Capitol was built, the very first building was the Senate building, which is just to the right of the big dome right there. That was the original structure that was built, and then they began to build the middle part that will be the rotunda. The original rotunda had a cap to it that was much smaller than the one you see. In fact, the one you see was built during the time of Abraham Lincoln. You can see pictures of it being constructed during one of his inaugurals. So they built that, and then the house was built on the other side. And then eventually they expanded the two wings. So where the Senate is now is further out, where the House is now is further out. But so in that context, these inaugurations took place in various stages and in various places. The Senate building was originally used, as was the House chamber, for the very first presidents. The first time it went outside was Andrew Jackson, and they used the east portico, not the west. The west portico is where it's been done since Ronald Reagan switched it from the east to the west, where you look down the mall and that beautiful setting that you've shown pictures of. It always prior to that was on the east side, and the east side is where you see those famous pictures of Lincoln when he's giving his second inaugural are on the east side. What's interesting is once they built this huge dome on top of the structure, it really made the pillars that were in front of the east look very small and out of place. So there was a project to redo that, and they took those pillars down. They took that facade down. And if you're in Washington and want to have some fun, those pillars are all in the National, I think, Arboretum, standing like, if you went to Rome and saw ruins and so forth, those pillars are out there. And they were replaced by new pillars and a new facade. So the facade you see with Lincoln is not the same facade where he spoke. It became much bigger and elaborate. And each president, made a decision about whether to go forward with, the exterior inauguration. When Grant was inaugurated, I think it was for his second time, it was extremely cold. It was like, 16 degrees. And he went out, nevertheless, gave his inauguration outside, but he held his inaugural ball in a room in the Treasury building where it was so cold, people were wearing overcoats and the champagne froze. So kind of a famous time there. But, being the Civil War general that he was not going to take it back inside. He held it outside. And then, of course, with Reagan, it was important because by the time you get, to Trump and to Reagan and so forth, you have so many people who show up and who are in danger of having frostbite, or really some bad things can happen in situation in that sort of weather. So I think it was a wise choice to move it inside, just like as it was with President Reagan. But over time, it has been, JFK, it was about the same temperature that it is right now, 22 degrees. He went ahead with it outside. And I think the better idea is to hold it during an inauguration.
Yeah, we're just looking at some of the arrivals yet again. Maybe we can listen to some of them here.
Jim, as we take a live look at the arrivals here inside the Capitol Rotunda, I want to ask you this, and maybe you know and maybe you don't, but we are awaiting President-elect Donald Trump to depart the Blair House and make his way here what's the process during this waiting period? 200 or so executive orders. Can you take us perhaps inside the Blair House as we do await his arrival here?
Well, I doubt he's practiced. I bet he's read over his speech many times, and he's pretty good at reading speeches. And I think he will. He has good delivery. He knows how to give a speech. My guess is he's talking to a lot of different people and getting ready to come over. It's interesting in our history how this, presidents getting to the Capitol to be sworn in. The first inauguration was in New York at a place called Federal Hall, where Washington came all the way from Mount Vernon and rode horseback and through carriages through various cities on the way and had all this big celebration of him coming to, to that ceremony. He gets to the ceremony. They go to give him the inauguration, and nobody had remembered to bring a Bible. They had to run and get one from a Masonic temple that he used, and that many presidents have used since because of its historic significance. He then walked over to church himself. And then when you had Thomas Jefferson, he left his hotel where he was in Washington and walked to his inaugural, the first one, and then walked back to the hotel following that inaugural. So that was kind of a important point. Later in his second inaugural, he rode a horse to Congress to be sworn in. That then followed with various presidents getting there by various means. I think the first to go in a car might have been McKinley. No, not McKinley. Would have been Harding. Subsequently, this tradition developed where once the president was done with the inauguration, then you would have a parade that followed on. And those parades became more and more elaborate. Eisenhower's lasted for 4.5 hours. It was the longest. Wilson's had 40,000 people marching in it. It was the most people marching in a parade. So that became kind of the tradition of the president going back. And as you know, Carter, when he left his inauguration, was being driven back to the White House when he stopped the car, got out, and started to walk. And that became extremely famous. And I think everybody has followed that, where they walk a portion of the time on the way back to the White House. Trump did it and Biden did it. It is become kind of a tradition. It'll be interesting to see in the cold weather whether they'll follow that pattern or not. I wouldn't, frankly, for security and other reasons. But this getting to there and then leaving ended up resulting in the parade that we have, because the early presidents were followed by their enthusiastic supporters back to the White House. Andrew Jackson had such enthusiastic supporters that they came back to the White House and ransacked it. I mean, they went in, punch bowls were thrown everywhere, curtains were torn down, people had to escape through the windows. It was just a scene, a joyous scene. But eventually, the way they got everyone out of the White House was to take these big punch bowls outside and get the people to leave the White House.
And Jim, I just wanted to pause as President-elect Donald Trump has now arrived at the White House. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcoming Trump and Melania Trump right there. I am going to raise the audio again. We might not be able to hear much, but let's listen in. And I have to say, this is really interesting as we're watching President Biden and President-elect Trump standing there apparently seeming to have a conversation of some sorts. And it's just so interesting to see the interactions, as always, as it was a very contentious, battle almost between the two before President Biden announcing that he would step down and step away from running once again for president. But Jim, when you take a look at that moment, we did this with JD Vance, of course, and Vice President Harris. But what do you make of that as they paused right where that photo opportunity was, but to apparently have some sort of conversation?
The same thing I said about the JD Vance moment. This is good for the country to see. The unity is good. The friendship shown between two men is good. Melania Trump looked a little uncomfortable, but that's a difficult role to be in. And when the two of them went in, it looked like they continued to talk. This is, this is reminiscent of Obama and Trump speaking at Carter's funeral too. This is a time for people to begin treating each other as not just political enemies, but as fellow Americans. If you look over time, that interaction can sometimes be very frosty. If you look at the when FDR came in 1933 and Hoover lost, they rode together in an open car with the same blanket over them to the Capitol for the inauguration. And FDR chatted away and Hoover said nothing. He was not happy. Carter and Reagan were similar. I don't think Carter was particularly chatty. I think Reagan, being who Reagan was particularly chatty. When Warren Harding won after the First World War, Woodrow Wilson had a stroke. 19 months earlier, he had tried to pass what was called the Versailles Treaty, the League of Nations. It failed. And he, trying to get it passed, Wilson went out into the country to stump for it, had this severe stroke in Denver, was taken back to the White House, had another very severe stroke. And so he was very disabled at that point. And by the time, it came time for Harding to come to the White House and to go with him, they did go over together. But once they got to the Capitol, Harding kind of excused Wilson and said, I will not blame you if you don't want to come out for the ceremony itself, because he really was disabled at that point. And so Wilson was taken to his house on S Street, which is still in existence, a great museum if you're in Washington to go see. But this transition of power, this thing that Reagan talked about in 1981 as being a miracle, it really is a miracle. And it really is interesting. If you look back at Thomas Jefferson, as I told you, there was a really severe fight between Adams and Jefferson. They would later in life become friends and would write letters to each other. They both die on the same day in 1826 on July the 4th, interestingly enough. But during that time, as I said, Adams left and Jefferson went ahead and gave his magnanimous speech. So if you look at, what has happened in these transitions of power, many people called that 1801 election a revolution, because it really was the first time we saw political power handed from one party to another. It was the very beginning of parties. And so people saw that as kind of an important revolution and an important development in the American experiment in democracy. And so it has been carried out ever since. And so this scene is a good scene for Americans. And let's hope that the inaugural also continues that feeling of let's unify as a country and move forward as a country. There are a lot of things that need to be addressed in this world and in this country. And, people need to work together to have that all happen.
Jim, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox. Time right now is 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. And if you are just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, we are continuing our coverage of Inauguration Day 2025. This is a live look right there outside the U.S. Capitol. As we have been sharing with you, arrivals continue inside the Capitol Rotunda. In fact, this is a live look right here of the Capitol Rotunda, as we have seen family members of President-elect Trump, as well as others, arriving here, getting ready to be seated. Meanwhile, we also want to share with our viewers as well that we were sharing with you the arrival of President-elect Donald Trump and Melania Trump here at the White House. President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden welcoming them in for a tea ceremony prior to the swearing in ceremony. They are inside the White House, media not allowed inside. And of course, one has to wonder what that conversation is going to be like. This is another vantage point there outside the White House. A very snowy ground, a very cold day, which is why in just the second time, the first time since 1985, the swearing-in ceremony will be held inside the Capitol Rotunda. And in fact, this is an aerial view right here. It keeps going in and out, so I didn't want to necessarily bring it to you full, but just a very brief look right here at the aerial view from inside the Capitol Rotunda right there. Just a bird's eye view, and you can see that folks are making their way inside. And this is a live look right here inside Capital One Arena, as of course it is a very chilly day. So unfortunately, the hundreds of thousands of individuals who made the journey to the U.S. Capitol to watch as history unfolds, as Donald J. Trump is sworn in as the 47th president. Unfortunately, the outside ceremony not happening, but you can already see that thousands of people are packing inside Capitol Run Arena to watch this via the screens. We also know that Trump will then, after being sworn in as president, make his way inside the arena to deliver additional remarks to those as well. And once again, I do want to bring in my colleague Andrew Kraft as we continue our live coverage here. And you can see that lawmakers, Andrew, are arriving there inside Capitol Hill as, arrivals do continue. As we continue to discuss all of this, what are your thoughts as we continue to watch this unfold? Truly historic in nature right there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You're seeing the former speakers of the House there, McCarthy, Boehner, and Gingrich. So that's always interesting to see them kind of commingling together. Of course, Republican political powerhouses, all three of them really in their own right there. But I just want to go back. Our viewers were just watching that really incredible, somewhat tense scene, I think, between the Bidens and the Trumps. And you just kind of have to get into the head of Trump, into the head of Biden. These are longtime political foes. We know that they cannot stand each other. On the surface, yes, they exchanged pleasantries. They had a short conversation. They took the photo here. But the 2020 election and the 2024 election were very hard-fought contests. We know Trump did not even attend the inauguration of Joe Biden. Of course, things look a lot different this time around. And right now, as we speak, they are having tea together in the White House. And that goes to what Jim Robidault was saying, that this is what this day is about, the peaceful transition of power. You set all that aside, no matter how hard it is in your marrow and in your bones, that you might be thinking to yourself, if you're Biden or Trump or even Harris with Vance, because electoral defeats are very painful, but you put all that aside for today, one day only. I think that's what Jim was alluding to. That's what this country is all about. That's what makes us unique. He called it, and many have called it, a miracle, so to speak. So I just wanted to note that there. Of course, we know President-elect Trump's relationship with former House Speaker McCarthy. You'll remember, Stephanie, in the wake of the January 6th Capitol attack, mere days, if not weeks afterward, Kevin McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago. And that was really seen as a game-changing moment. That was seen as a moment that was rehabilitating Trump's image in the wake of the January 6th Capitol attack, that there were going to be fellow Republicans who will still stand by him and forgive him. for January 6th. So I thought that was interesting. McCarthy, of course, we know how that unfolded for him. He lost the gavel. His own fellow Republicans, 8 of them, ousting him from the speakership now a little bit over a year ago. And so he's on hand. There's going to be a lot of people on hand in the Capitol Rotunda. But that's what I'm thinking of right now. And just for our viewers, to give them up to speed on what's happening live right now, they are, the Bidens and the Trumps, having tea together at the White House before they ride together to the Capitol, to the Rotunda for the swearing in.
You know, and we're taking a live look, Andrew, of the White House right there as the tea ceremony is underway. You know, it's always so interesting as we see, you know, the political rivalry, you know, front and center, you know, especially during the election cycle. And, you know, the ability for some, perhaps not all, but some of these politicians to then set that rivalry, that contentiousness aside, you know, and seeing beyond perhaps the political party and seeing the person instead. You know, as we take a look at the political landscape, you know, what do you make of that? Because we were seeing President-elect Trump and former President Barack Obama speaking with one another quite cordially at the funeral service of former President Jimmy Carter. Of course, you know, not everyone is able to, you know, put those politics aside after leaving office, after handing the baton, so to speak. You know, but one has to wonder what the conversation is like now inside the White House, as in just hours, President Biden no longer president, and President-elect Trump will be sworn in as the 47th president of the United States, and for the second time.
Right. I mean, history is contingent. Elections matter. I'm sure you have. I know I have lost contests in my personal life, minor, large, grand, small, and it's tough and it hurts. But that's what this day is about. You put those aside. You let bygones be bygones for at least a couple hours.
Absolutely. And that apparently is what they are going to do. And, you know, just to give our viewers just another look right here, I did want to share this live look right here as well, as we are taking a look outside the Capitol Hill right there, outside the Capitol building. You can see buses lining up, most likely to bring in individuals into the Capitol Rotunda. And there is the aerial view. Unfortunately, it does go in and out, as you know, we do get these live streams from time to time. But I did want to share that with you as we continue this live look right here. You know, Andrew, as we continue to take a look at this, you know, it is so interesting to see who is in attendance, who is being joined. And you can see people from really both parties attending, as well as you know, staunch supporters. In fact, you can see some of these, Marco Rubio right there, Senator Marco Rubio, likely no longer to be that, obviously, as we have heard that Governor DeSantis has named his successor. But really the who's who right there in terms of cabinet selections.
Yeah, you're seeing all of the Trump cabinet selections get off that charter bus right there, and we can name them. We know, Stephanie, the confirmation hearings are literally happening as we speak. We saw a lot of that last week. It's going to pick up this week as well. These are the people Trump has chosen to help him lead and plan the agenda for the next 4 years. And so you see them all there, get off that charter bus. Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, Pete Hegseth, and others there.
Absolutely. And I did also want to share this with our viewers, you know, and actually we see some of the outgoing members as well, perhaps, as everyone is seated right here. So, you know, we are awaiting the arrival of both President-elect Donald Trump and President Biden. They, of course, are having their pre-inauguration, you know, ceremony, as we continue to see, you know, individuals trickle. You know, but also, you know, as we take a live look right here, this is historic in nature because this is atypical, Andrew. This is not something that we traditionally see every 4 years with the swearing in ceremony. I did want to share this with our viewers as well. As you can see, a live look there, you know, a larger, you know, more extensive view of the Capitol building right there where everyone is congregating. And of course, as we have been sharing and talking about, there, of course, is a reason why when it comes to the fact that the mall is completely empty. No one is in attendance. No one is allowed to congregate there because of the frigid weather. And so I did want to share that with our viewers as well. And a beautiful live look right here. From the view top, from the rooftop, I should say, of the Washington Monument, and this really giving us a clearer picture. We see the American flag there, waving in the wind, and the wind chill making it even feel like single digits right here as we continue to await the arrival of President-elect Trump and, of course, President Biden.
Yeah, that was a really cool shot there atop the White House. To your point, the flag's still at half staff. If we have the inside of the rotunda, we can point out some of the people that are there. I think that would be helpful for some people watching because, to your point, Stephanie, it is going to be a who's who of the federal government. It's going to be a who's who of Washington. But world leaders are also in attendance. I believe I saw the Argentinian president, Javier Milei, and other former world leaders as well. So we'll do our best pointing out these individuals, pointing out these members of Congress, former members of Congress, incoming and outgoing members of both administrations here. That's always, to your point, interesting to see who's there and who's not, who's seated next to who and who's standing maybe. But we're finally getting a live picture inside of the rotunda. We were wondering how this was all going to look because they had to pull it together so quickly. And there you see more of these individuals walking into Congress there. And if I recognize anyone, I will definitely point them out here. Looks like Tulsi Gabbard there, Vivek Ramaswamy, other members of the incoming Trump cabinet, and some of the staffers who will work in the second Trump White House. Upon confirmation, of course, there's Elon Musk.
And
Maybe
Andrew,
if we can see if we can hear some of the natural sound, that's always interesting too.
it is, and we can see the inside of the rotunda as this, they continue to, weave through shots right here. But, as we take a moment to pause, I do want to bring in Rebecca Castor with Fox News as well as we continue our live coverage right here. And Rebecca, we're taking a live look from inside the Capitol Rotunda as we see lawmakers, officials, and really the who's who of Washington and the business industry, arrive ahead of this swearing-in ceremony. We see the Capitol building right there behind you as we are awaiting the arrival of President-elect Donald Trump. Security, of course, top of mind, thousands of law enforcement officers spreading out across Washington, D.C. to make sure that what happens is as seamless as possible, a hustle and bustle, if you will, ahead of the swearing-in ceremony. So, can you set the scene for us right now?
Hey, Stephanie, good morning. So speaking with other reporters on our Fox team who have covered inaugurations here in D.C. in the past, they're saying that this security feels a lot more ramped up than previous inaugurations. So even though things have moved indoors, security is still red hot. They have the Capitol building pretty much locked down like a fortress. There are miles and miles of fencing all around the Capitol building, as well as some of the nearby streets. It's really hard to travel by car here in downtown D.C. right now. People are saying that they've been having to walk for several miles to get to some of these locations. But yesterday, thousands of police officers from across the country arrived here in D.C. They were sworn in by the local police chief, and they have been given police powers to help out the D.C. Metro Police as well as the Capitol Police as well. They're expecting at least 19 different protests to possibly happen around the district today, so we're going to be monitoring that. We know that they're going to have drones out, also monitoring events from the sky. So if anybody is here watching locally and they see drones in the air, that is likely what they are doing, monitoring some of these events. A lot of things are going to look different today than they have in the past now that this inauguration is moving inside the Capitol. It's been 40 years since a president was sworn in inside the Capitol Rotunda. Those lawmakers that are entering now to the Capitol Rotunda, that's an exclusive invitation. We're told only about 600 people are going to be able to sit inside the Capitol to be able to watch the swearing in happen in person. There's going to be an overflow room as well. So I think there was some discussion on Capitol Hill, lawmakers lobbying to try to get the best seat in the House and to actually be there in person as opposed to that overflow room. But it's just not going to be the same event as if we would have seen Donald Trump outside on the west front of the Capitol taking the oath of office. Of course, all of these changes, primary reason is the weather. This morning, the feels like temperature was about 12 degrees. The sun is up, so it's warmed up a bit now. It feels a little bit more comfortable outside, but that decision was made with the safety in mind of the hundreds of thousands of people from all over the country who traveled to D.C. and were going to congregate on the National Mall. They've actually shut that down. People that are still here are not able to even be around the National Mall today. They've locked it down because the police just don't want people gathering because of just the safety conditions out here in the weather.
All right, Rebecca, we do appreciate you sharing that with us as we continue to follow the very latest. And we did want to once again share this live look outside the Capitol Rotunda. We saw Jeff Bezos, of course, founder, CEO of Amazon, along with his fiancee, Lauren Sanchez. And I did want to raise the audio to see what we can hear as the arrivals continue at the U.S. Capitol ahead of the swearing-in ceremony. And we see former President Bill Clinton along with Hillary Rodham Clinton also in attendance right there, just posing for pictures. And we do know that, all of the living presidents will be in attendance, as well as the former first ladies, everyone except for Michelle Obama, who will not be attending, not giving any particular reason why that is. She also did not attend former President Jimmy Carter's funeral as well. As we continue truly to see the who's who, we do hear some of the music right here, so we pause on the commentary and allow you to listen in. And there we have Rudy Giuliani, the former attorney for President-elect Donald Trump, of course, the former mayor there of New York City, as Rudy Giuliani now making his way inside ahead of the swearing-in ceremony for President-elect Donald Trump. We continue to see this, but I do want to pivot now because we do see here the departure there at the White House, as we do see Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff and soon to be First Lady Vice President there. And we are waiting in. I'm going to raise the audio as we are expecting President Biden and President-elect Donald J. Trump to be departing as well momentarily.
Yeah, and Stephanie, we're just watching, you just got the second gentleman there, Doug Emhoff.
UGSOUND online radio is regulated by Uganda Communications Commission.
There, leave the White House. We know tea is happening.